buddies. Welcome back to the final chapter of The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary. Chapter 13, A Subject for a Composition. Ralph was a real hero in the mouse hole that night. His admiring relatives gathered around, begging to hear the story of his adventures. Ralph could not help bragging just a little as he told the story of his travels, beginning with the search of the second-floor rooms, skipping the part about the teachers trapping him under the drinking glass, and ending with Keith taking the aspirin and finally falling asleep. "But are you really sure it was an aspirin tablet?" Ralph's mother could always find something to worry about. "Are you sure it wasn't some other kind of pill?" "Keith put it on the bedside table and refused to take it until his mother saw it," explained Ralph. At first, his mother and father got pretty excited and thought he was out of his mind from fever when he started to tell them that there was an aspirin on the table. Then, when they saw the pill and could tell from the letters that it was really an aspirin, they decided the night clerk must have found it and brought it up. They thought the windows rattled so much they didn't hear his knock. "Oh, Ralph, I'm so proud of you," said his mother with a sigh of relief, while his brothers and sisters and cousins stared at him with shining eyes. "Good work, Ralph. I didn't think you could do it," said Uncle Lester heartedly. "I feel so much better about room service now that we left an aspirin for a tip," said Ralph's mother. "I feel that at least we've done the right thing." "Our Ralph is growing up," said Aunt Sissy. "Yes, Ralph is growing up," agreed his mother with a sad note to her voice. "It's hard to believe. It seems only yesterday that he was a tiny pink mouse without any hair." Naturally, this embarrassed Ralph, but now that his mother had finally admitted he was growing up, he decided to make the most of his moment. "Now can I go down to the first floor by myself?" he asked eagerly. "We'll see," said his mother, looking worried once more. "Nonsense," said Uncle Lester. "Of course he may go. Ralph has shown that he can be a very responsible mouse." I guess you're right," said Ralph's mother nervously. "Oh, boy!" exclaimed Ralph. "Tell us again how you climbed down the vine and the owl nearly got you," begged a cousin. "No, tell us again about how the ambulance got stuck in the crack," said another. "No, tell the part about how you got the dog to bark," pleaded a third. The only flaw in the evening for Ralph was the fact that he had not found the motorcycle on his travels through the hotel. Keith slept soundly, and the next morning, although he still had a temperature, Ralph was pleased to see he was feeling much better. "Do you hurt any place?" Mrs. Gridley was anxious after she had given her son the aspirin brought by the milkman. "Is your throat sore? Do you have a stomach ache?" Keith shook his head. "I just feel sort of tired." "He's gonna be all right. He must have picked up some bug someplace," said Mrs. Gridley to her husband. "A day in bed with plenty of fluids, and he'll be on his feet again." Mr. Gridley nodded. "Do you feel like eating any breakfast?" he said to Keith. "We could order something for you for room service." Keith brightened. "Can I really have something set up from room service?" he asked. And when his dad assured him he could, he slumped back on the pillows. "But I'm not really hungry." "Some orange juice would be good for you," suggested his mother. "All right," said Keith, and then added, as if he suddenly had an inspiration, "and bacon and toast and jelly." "Your appetite seems to have come back in a hurry," remarked Mr. Gridley as he picked up the telephone and asked for a connection to room service to order, he thought, breakfast for his son. As soon as the adults were gone, Ralph popped out into the room. "Hi," said Keith. "Thanks a lot for the aspirin. It really helped." "That's all right," answered Ralph modestly. "Where did you find it?" Keith was curious to know. "Under a dresser down in the first floor." "The first floor?" Keith could not believe it. "How did you manage to get it up here?" Once more, Ralph told the story of his night's adventures, skipping the part about the drinking glass, but making it sound as if he narrowly escaped the talons of an owl while he traveled down the vine. "Golly!" Keith was amazed at Ralph's story. "You know what? You're a pretty smart mouse, and a brave one, too." "It was nothing," said Ralph in an offhand manner. "Nothing. It was plenty. You risked your life." The boy's admiration and gratitude made Ralph feel even prouder of what he had accomplished. "I parked your ambulance out in the hall," he said, wanting Keith to know how responsible he was. "Your folks will probably see it and bring it in when they come back." "That reminds me. You didn't happen to see my motorcycle anyplace, did you?" Keith's question wasn't unexpected. "Well, no, I didn't." Ralph was less proud of himself. "But I didn't have much time to look." "Yeah, I know." Keith was sympathetic. "I just wondered." A knock on the door sent Ralph scurrying to the knothole. "Come in," said Keith. Matt entered with a tray. "Here you are, and here's your ambulance. I found it out in the hall," he said as he set the tray across Keith's knees. "Sorry to see you're under the weather." "Thank you, I'll be all right." Keith handed Matt a coin his father had left for a tip. "And thanks for bringing in my ambulance." Matt pocketed the coin. "Thank you," he said. "And by the way, this doesn't happen to be yours, does it?" He pulled a little motorcycle out of his pocket. Ralph was so excited he almost fell out of the knothole. "Hey!" Keith sat straight up, rocking the orange juice on his tray. "It sure is. Where'd you find it?" "In a hamper of linen that had been chewed by mice, or by a mouse. It fell out when the housekeeper was showing us the damage it had done. I picked it up before anyone noticed it." "Gee, thanks. Thanks a lot." Keith accepted the motorcycle and set it on his tray. "It's my favorite. I didn't like losing it." "I wonder how it got in the hamper linen." Matt mused. Keith grinned but said nothing. Old Matt rubbed his chin and stared at the ceiling. "I don't suppose a certain irresponsible mouse happened to ride it into a pile of sheets and pillowcases and got tangled up and dumped into the hamper." Keith tried not to laugh. "I don't know any irresponsible mice," he said. "Only one responsible mouse. Say, how did you guess?" "There isn't much around this hotel that escapes my attention," said Matt. "I saw that mouse out in the hall with a little motorcycle. I imagine he's a regular speed demon." Ralph could no longer stay out of the conversation. "I'm fast, but I'm careful. I haven't had an accident yet," he boasted, and then added, recalling his fall into the wastebasket, "at least not since I learned to ride the motorcycle." "If there's anything I can't stand, it's a cheeky mouse," said Matt good-naturedly. "What do you call getting tangled up in the linen?" "Well, I mean, I didn't crack up the motorcycle," said Ralph with dignity. "He's not cheeky," defended Keith. "He's brave. You aren't going to tell the management about him, are you?" "What's the use?" said Matt. "If they get rid of these mice, more will move in. Anyway, he's a cute little fellow. It cheers me up to think of him tearing around in the little motorcycle." "If only I could," thought Ralph. There followed an unusually pleasant day for mice. Keith stuffed the bacon, toast, and jam through the knothole. The mice feasted on bacon and jelly before the ants could get to them, and stored the toast against the rapidly approaching time when Keith must leave the hotel. They slept all morning while Keith alternately snapped and played with his cars. For lunch, they enjoyed peanut butter sandwiches again. Ralph did not sleep well that afternoon. He found himself thinking of the tantalizing glimpse he had had of the ground floor and of all the opportunities it offered mice. Crumbs from the dining room, leftovers in the kitchen, scraps in the garbage. He lay daydreaming in a pile of shredded Kleenex. He could see himself on the first floor, pilfering for crumbs in the dining room at night after the guests went to bed. And from the dining room, he could go into the kitchen, right past the night clerk, who was sure to be asleep. If only he could make a trip on the motorcycle. The thought of the motorcycle put an end to Ralph's daydream and made sleep impossible. After tossing about in his bed of Kleenex, he got up and poked his head out of the knothole. Keith was awake, lying back on the pillows with his cars beside him. He smiled at Ralph. "How are you feeling?" asked Ralph. "Oh, sort of tired," answered Keith. Ralph climbed through the knothole. "Where are your folks?" "They went out for a little while. They'll be back. I'm supposed to take a nap." "Are you going to?" asked Ralph. "I'd rather talk to you." Keith leaned over and set the motorcycle on the floor. "Want to ride it?" "Do I want to ride it?" Ralph could scarcely believe he'd heard correctly. "You mean you let me after the way I lost it?" "You proved you could be responsible when you brought me the aspirin," explained Keith. "You're more grown up." "Thanks," Ralph said modestly. "I guess mice grow up faster than boys." Keith sounded as though he longed to be grown as rapidly as a mouse. "You grow a little bit each day," Ralph said, as he removed his crash helmet from the hiding place behind the curtain. "I guess you're right," agreed Keith. "My dad measures me every 6 months against the door jamb in our kitchen back in Ohio, and each mark he makes is a little higher than the last, but I never feel myself growing." "You wait long enough and you'll be a grown-up." Ralph felt as if he'd said something very wise as he slipped the rubber band of his crash helmet under his whiskers. "I guess so." Keith slumped back on the pillows. "But it takes so long." "I grew up, didn't I?" asked Ralph. "You said yourself that I'd become a responsible mouse." "Yes, you did," Keith said thoughtfully. "I guess that's part of the secret. Just getting bigger isn't enough. You have to learn things like not taking off down a steep hill on a bicycle when you're not used to handbrakes, stuff like that. Ralph walked with a slight swagger to the motorcycle, grabbed the hand grips, and threw his legs across the seat. He remembered to pick up his tail before he started. He took off across the carpet and circled the room, covering the rough parts under the dresser and the chair and coming to a halt beside the bed. "She has a good balance on a rough road," said Ralph with authority. "She's a mighty fine machine." "Say, Ralph," said Keith, suddenly sitting up, "how would you like to come with me when we leave the hotel?" "Come with you?" Ralph was stunned. He'd expected to live and die in the Mountain View Inn, and now he'd been offered an opportunity to travel like he'd always dreamed of. "Yes, come with me to San Francisco and then back to Ohio." Ralph first thought of the motorcycle. If he went with Keith, he would not have to be separated from the motorcycle. Keith must have sensed Ralph's thoughts because he said you could ride the motorcycle every day. Ralph was silent. He had begun to think of other things, his family, the permission he'd earned to visit the ground floor, Keith's family, and how they might feel about a mouse. "Come on, Ralph," said Keith. "You can travel in my pocket." "Your mother doesn't care for mice," Ralph pointed out. "Not running around loose," said Keith. "But she'd let me keep a couple of mice once. I still have their cage at home. You'd be very comfortable in it." "Comfortable in a cage?" Ralph was horrified. "No, thank you." "Aw, come on. Would you like to be shut up in a cage?" demanded Ralph. "Well, no, but then neither would I," said Ralph, "especially now that I can finally go to the ground floor." In his disappointment, Keith slumped back on the pillows once more. "I guess I knew you really wouldn't want to come," he said. "I understand." "I sure will hate to see this motorcycle leave," said Ralph, and then added, "and you too, of course." The boy and the mouse were silent. Both were thinking of their wishes and their regrets that their wishes could not come true. Keith rolled over on his side and propped his head up on his fist. "Would you like to keep the motorcycle?" he asked. "Keep it? Me?" "Sure," said Keith. "I can save up my allowance and buy another one when we get back home." "You really mean it?" Ralph could scarcely contain his excitement. "Keep it for my very own?" "Of course." "How come?" Ralph wanted to know. "I just like to think of you riding on it," said Keith. "You know, if you grow up enough to be trusted with a mouse-sized motorcycle, maybe someday I can earn a real big one." The excitement drained out of Ralph. "I can't. I don't have any place to keep it. It's too big to go through the knothole, and I couldn't hide it behind the curtain forever because I've heard that after Labor Day, when there aren't so many tourists, they take the curtains down to be cleaned." "That is a problem," agreed Keith. "There must be someplace in this big hotel like this that you could keep a motorcycle." Ralph sat on the motorcycle thinking as hard as he could. In a closet? He couldn't get it out if the door was closed. Under the bed? Eventually that would be found. "What about downstairs?" Keith suggested. "I could carry it down for you before we leave. There must be a good hiding place down there somewhere." "There's that big old clock my ancestor ran up," Ralph said thoughtfully. "Nobody ever cleans under it. Frankly, I don't care to have it striking over my head." Keith thought for a while. "What about the big television set in the lobby?" he said. "The noise shouldn't bother you because you'd only go under it at night when everyone's asleep." "Yes," Ralph said, excited. "That's a perfect garage. I saw it when I got the aspirin. The legs are just high enough for a motorcycle, but not quite high enough for a vacuum cleaner." "Then it's settled," said Keith, and then added rather sternly, Ralph thought, "but first, you must ask your mother." Ralph dismounted and ran to the knothole. He'd been gone several minutes before he returned to announce in triumph, "She says I can keep the motorcycle if I promise to drive carefully and wear my crash helmet every single time I ride it." "Swell!" Keith was just as excited as Ralph. "When we check out, I'll hide it for you while my folks are busy paying the bill." "I can't thank you enough." Ralph fastened his crash helmet once more. "I never thought I'd have a motorcycle of my very own." Keith lay back on the pillows and smiled at the mouse mounting the motorcycle. "It'll be fun thinking of you riding around the big old lobby when I'm back in Ohio this winter going to school. And then the teacher asked us to write a composition about our summer vacation, and I can write about the brave mouse named Ralph who rode a little motorcycle. I'll tell about you bringing the aspirin, except for I'll call it a pill because I can't spell aspirin. Of course, the teacher won't believe it, but she'll probably say I show great imagination." Ralph felt proud to think that he was going to be written about in a composition in far-off Ohio. He grabbed his tail, gunned the motor, and took off, heading for the threadbare part of the carpet, making such a good speedway. Ralph went round and round he sped, faster and faster until his whiskers blew back, and he was filled with the joy of speed. He longed to wave at Keith, but he realized a good driver must keep both paws on the hand grips. He glanced up and noticed Keith's eyes were closed. The boy had fallen asleep with a smile on his face. Ralph dragged his heels to brake the motorcycle. Quietly, he parked it beside the bed and quickly removed his crash helmet and hid it under the curtain. He didn't want to disturb the sleeping boy. Ralph could not wait to ride the motorcycle. It was his to keep. There's Ralph and his motorcycle. The end. Friends, I hope you enjoyed our book, and don't forget to look at all the study guide that was sent to you. And if you'd like, we will start a new book next week. Join me right here, and until then, goodbye, friends.